Listening to Mack Maloney's Military X-Files show here on the Global Radio Alliance. And on the line with us now is our guest for tonight, who is an expert in black triangles, which is kind of like a subculture of UFOs. It's Shawn Kevin Jason calling in from Tucson, Arizona tonight. Shawn, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How about yourself, Mac?
Doing okay. What's the weather like out there in Tucson today?
Oh, nice and sunny as usual.
Mm-hmm. And is it sunny, pretty much 365 out there?
Oh, yeah. It's not much different than Las Vegas. We get a lot of sun and little rain.
Well, there's no gambling there.
Actually, we have a few casinos on the Indian reservations here, so it's not too far of a drive from Tucson.
Oh, wow. Now, Tucson, I drove through Tucson many, many years ago. What I remember is that there were signs along the highway saying, don't pick up people who are hitchhiking in orange coveralls because they might be escaped prisoners.
Yeah.
They still have those signs out there?
Yeah, actually they still do. Still got the prisons here, so naturally you probably don't want to pick up any hitchhikers.
Right, but at least if you're in prison, it's good to be in prison in Tucson as opposed to be in Alaska or someplace, right? I mean, the climate is pleasant.
True. You're not freezing to death.
So anyway, well, listen, let's not talk about prisons. Let's talk about the subject at hand, and that's black triangles. Now, can you just, for our audience out there, just give us a, concise thumbnail view, a description of what black triangles are exactly?
Well, it's basically, like you said, a subculture of UFOs. It's a specific type of UFO that has been seen mostly during the last 2 decades. Probably a little bit in the 70s, but mainly it's the 80s, 90s, and this past decade that they've been reported. They come in different shapes and sizes, but typically they're black and triangular.
So, now what is it about black triangles that makes them different from UFOs? When people think of UFOs, we know that, you have the typical flying saucer shape, and then you have the cigar-shaped object, which is, I think, is the most reported UFO. But when I think black triangles, I think of something that is huge, like something on an immense scale that sometimes moves very slowly through the sky, but other times moves very quickly. Am I right?
Yeah, and it depends. There's all kinds of different black triangles, like I said, and some are very massive and some are quite small. Most of them actually seem to move quite slow, although there have been several reported to, as the witness described, was moving at light speed. So there's different sizes, different speeds. Basically, though, what it boils down to is what is a black triangle. And if you examine what a black triangle is, it basically equates to a stealth aircraft. Essentially, a black triangle is an aircraft that was built in a way that deflects radar beams just because of the surface, the flat angles. It basically just diverts the radar beam away from the receiver. So in that respect, it's a stealth aircraft. It's also black. It's also silent. There's no heat signature. So in a number of ways, these aircraft could be called stealth aircraft.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and not necessarily just black triangles, but specifically there's some type of stealth aircraft.
Well, what are the chances then that these are man-made objects, that they're just some kind of secret aircraft, or, what do you think they are?
Well, in the situation of my encounter back in '96, I was within 20 feet of the craft, so I got a really good look at it. And the light bulbs they were using were incandescent light bulbs, basically a Thomas Edison light. And you simply can't have alien technology and old technology like an incandescent light bulb going together. The aliens are supposedly, hundreds if not thousands of years more advanced than we are, and yet supposedly they can't invent a better light bulb.
Back up for a second. Why don't you tell us about your encounter in '96? Where were you? What happened? So on.
Well, actually, I lived in Las Vegas at the time. I was on my way to Area 51, and I was on Highway 93, and I saw a light up ahead, and I didn't think much of it at first. I thought it was another car, but as I got closer, I realized this light was hovering over the road, not necessarily on the road. And my first reaction was it was possibly a helicopter, a police copter, maybe some kind of speed trap. But it didn't make sense to me. So I got closer to it. I was able to see it with my binoculars before I even approached it and realized there was indeed something over the road, but it wasn't anything I've seen before. excuse me. So eventually, I got there. It stayed, and I parked underneath it, and it was basically just hovering 20 feet over the highway. And it lasted about 10 minutes from the first time I saw the light till the time it left the scene.
I mean, it was just hovering there over the highway?
Yeah, it was just
And what
sitting
time
there.
of day was this?
This was in the evening, about 10 o'clock.
And were there any other cars on the highway at the time?
No, unfortunately, I was the only one, as often as, goes in these types of situations.
And how high off the ground was it, would you say?
20 feet was close enough. I probably could have, hit it with a rock if I wanted to.
And what measurements would you say?
It was a little bit larger than, say, a stealth aircraft. It was a perfect equilateral triangle, pitch black. You couldn't make out any detail on a craft, on the craft itself, minus the light bulbs, which for me was all the detail I needed to see.
Now, when you say light bulbs, what do you mean? That you actually saw light bulbs on this thing?
Yeah, on the underside of the craft, it had 9 light bulbs, basically in a V shape, 4 down one side, 4 down the other, and then 1 in the front center. The light bulbs were basically incandescent floodlights, rather large, maybe a 8-inch diameter, very large coils on the inside, but your standard, typical incandescent bulb.
Well, okay, so now that makes sense for what you were saying earlier, that how could this be something, a UFO, when you're looking at, standard GE bulbs or something, right?
Exactly, and in fact, during the encounter, I pulled out my binocular because I wanted a better look at these light bulbs, just because I was expecting to see something that says GE on the actual bulb. But when I reached for the binoculars, that's when the Black Triangle took off. Now, when it took off to my 7 o'clock position, and it got some distance away from me before I saw it again and caught it flying away from me, and I was able to zoom in with my binoculars on the craft and get a good look on the top of it as well, which was basically a tetrahedron.
Oh, wait,
a short one.
Slow down, egghead. Please tell us what that is.
It was basically a 3-sided pyramid, a short 3-sided pyramid.
Okay. And when it took off, how fast did it go?
It actually was quite slow. I thought it was slower than a helicopter.
Okay. Now, so you're on the highway. It's 10 o'clock. How far outside of Vegas were you?
Not far at all, actually. It was maybe 10 minutes out of Vegas.
Okay. And so you stop, you look at this thing, it's hovering, and then as you're maybe coincidentally reaching for your binoculars, it takes off. So it doesn't take off, it kind of moves off, right? If it's going slow, it kind of just moves away?
True. And it just moves away, but of course, my first reaction, it must have just took off at light speed until I caught it to my rear position and realized I hadn't got that far.
And then where did it go?
Actually, it headed north from my position towards Nellis Air Force Range.
Right, okay. Nellis Air Force Base is right outside of Las Vegas. It's a huge Air Force base that they have all kinds of, not only is it a huge Air Force base, but they have all kinds of nuclear weapons are stored there, and then the Nellis Range, which takes up a large part of the state of Nevada, is of course where Area 51 is in the middle of it, and a lot of other secret places, and it's where the aircraft from Nellis go out and do bombing missions and practicing and so on. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on out in that part of the world. So for you to see something like that out in that part of the world is very interesting. So, I mean, what did you think it was? I mean, how do you think it was? What was its propulsion, do you think?
Well, I mean, in the beginning, it was quite difficult for me to figure out what it was, even though it did have man-made light bulbs on it. The circumstances under which the encounter occurred, because I had already known previously, before the event, that I was going to have an encounter that night, simply because I've had this ability since I was younger to see things before they happen. So I was actually at work that evening when I was basically given a message and told to be at Area 51 that night. So naturally, once I left work, I took off, went home, got changed, and headed out there. And shortly after, I had the encounter.
Now, okay, let's kind of explore that a little bit. Now, you say that since you were younger, that you had this ability to explain it again, please?
Basically, it's precognition. It's the ability to predict future events.
Okay, and on this particular night, you were told to go out to this area, and you felt you were going to see something. Is that it?
Yeah, and of course my first reaction was I had already been studying the UFO phenomenon up to that point, so I was quite familiar with abductions and telepathy, things of that nature. So my first reaction was, I'm going out to be abducted. I'm going to meet the aliens, whatever. They're going to roll out the red carpet, what have you. But basically that was what was on my mind.
Right.
So, of course, when I see the Black Triangle, it was completely unexpected and not what I had gone out there to, see that night.
Mm-hmm.
So
hey, you might actually win our remote viewing game with this ability of yours. Might be in for $100, Go back to Vegas. So how old were you when this happened?
That was in my early 20s. I think I was about 23 at the time.
Now, when did you first know that you had this, ability, this precognition ability?
It started in my preteens. I was probably about 14 years old when it first started.
And do you remember the first time it happened and what it was about?
Actually, I was a bit of a troublemaker when I was younger, so I was actually out running the streets with a friend, and we were just kind of BSing on the corner, and I got the strong impression there was a police officer pulling up behind us, and I said to my friend, there's a cop car pulling up down the street behind us, right?
I've had that feeling. Yeah, go ahead.
And his jaw just dropped, and he didn't say a word to me, and that was all I needed to know that I was right, because he wouldn't answer me. He just kind of gave me this dumbfounded stare. And of course, I turned around, and as soon as I did, this cop car pulls up to us.
And where was this? Was this in Vegas or Tucson?
Yeah, this is just growing up in Las Vegas.
Now, growing up in Las Vegas, that must have been just kind of unusual in itself, right? Growing up in Vegas.
Oh, absolutely. There's no other city like it, and there's only one Sin City like Las Vegas, and growing up there was kind of a different experience or world in itself.
Right. Hey, listen, and you're listening to Mack Maloney's Military X-Files here on the Global Radio Alliance. We're talking with Shawn Kevin Jason tonight. He's an expert on black triangles, and we're getting into how he had an encounter in 1996, but also what led up to that encounter is that he has this precognitive ability. He knows what's going to happen before it happens, and we're talking a little bit about that. So, if you don't mind me asking, why were you in Las Vegas? Why was your family in Las Vegas? Was your father a military man or something along those lines, or a dealer?
Yeah, he was Air Force, so that Nellis Air Force Base was his final station where he retired at.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. And so, growing up as a teenager in Vegas in the 90s, do I have the time frame right?
Yeah, late 90s, 90s and the late 80s.
Mm-hmm. And, what was that like? I've been out there. I'm fascinated by the place, but is it, what's it like growing up in Las Vegas?
Well, it has its ups and downs. Most people never travel outside the Strip, so they kind of get that whole tourist feel of Vegas. But, it's a city just like any other city. It has your neighborhoods, your communities, your schools, all that good stuff. But living in Vegas, we kind of had our own, I don't even know how to put it, just our Vegas juju going on, I guess.
Excuse me?
Being from Vegas is, is different,
You say juju?
To say juju. Yeah, that Vegas juju.
Okay, where are we going with this? What does that mean? Like a vibe, like a Vegas vibe?
Yeah, it just got that Vegas vibe kind of with you, and it just follows you with through your life, I guess.
All right. I know that as I say, I've been out there a number of times, and I know what you mean. Like people go to Vegas, they stay on the Strip, and then they go home. They don't go downtown. And Fulton Street, isn't that the real kind of downtown of the casinos and stuff?
Well, yeah, you have the old downtown area where they got the Horseshoe and the Four Queens and the kind of the older part of Las Vegas, and then of course you got the Strip area with all the newer casinos and the glitz and the glamour.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that must have been a very interesting place, and I'm assuming that a lot of people who live out there, they're either attached to the military or they're in some way attached to one of the casinos, right?
Absolutely, and for a while there, it was a big military town. Of course, now it's a major tourist attraction. And but either way, you either work at a casino or you're military out there.
Right, or you're in the mob.
Or you're in the mob, exactly.
So anyway, hey, listen, we're talking to Shawn Kevin Jason here tonight on the Mack Maloney Military X-Files show, and We're a little bit off track here, but we're talking about black triangles, and I'm very interested in this precognition ability that you have. So at one point, so you knew that the cop car was coming with you and your buddy. You were hanging out in Vegas, and you knew that the cop car was coming. And then how else did it manifest itself? Were you able to kind of, let the ability grow, or would it just come to you out of the blue?
It usually came to me out of the blue. It wasn't anything I had any control over. It just kind of happened to me. And in the beginning, I usually just chalked it up as coincidence, but it just kept happening over and over and over. And it was always, dead spot on. So eventually I realized to recognize it, and when it would happen, to start doing whatever it is it told me.
So just give us a few really good examples that stand out in your mind of where you just had this thought and it absolutely came true.
Well, see, I was playing softball, and my brother was on the team, and it was on Nellis Air Force Base, and we were playing a game, and I was up at bat next, and I got this strong image that I'm going to basically knock a line drive into the pitcher and take her out of the game, was the vision. So I started telling all my friends, hey, watch this, I'm going to shotgun the pitcher, I'm going to take her ass out. Pardon my language. And I get up to base, and she pitches, and I let it go. She pitches again, I just put everything into it, and line drive right to her chest. And she just hits the ground. Wow. And I run to first base, and I get halfway there, and it just dawned on me that she's not moving at that point. And I'm like freaking out, like, how bad did I hurt her? Because, I had full understanding that I was going to hurt her before I hit the ball. And wow. Eventually the coach ran out there, her parents ran out, the whole team runs out there to see if she's okay. She gets up, she gets out of the game, they replaced the pitcher. She was okay, she was just really stunned and kind of had her breath knocked out. But in any game we played her, or played that team afterwards, she would never pitch me another ball again. I always got a free base.
Well, I don't blame her. So now let me ask you this. Now, so you have this ability where you know what's going to happen in the future, and you live in Las Vegas. Why aren't you a multimillionaire? Or maybe you are.
Well, actually, I did use it to gamble, and I still do use it sometimes to gamble. By the time I moved out of Las Vegas, I probably hit somewhere around 40 royal flushes.
Son of a bitch.
I mean,
really?
Most people never hit one or two of them, but for me, it was just like, a four of a kind. It wasn't that hard.
Right. Wow. How about that? Huh? So why would you leave Vegas then?
Well, we had
to go there. Okay.
No, I don't want to go there, but I had some better opportunities out of state and some family, and we moved out of state and settled down, start a family, and all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Have you gone to the racetrack with this ability ever?
No.
Okay. So, all right, let's get back. We're a little off. So anyway, so now so it's this night, this particular night in 1996, you have this feeling that you're going to see something's going to happen this particular night. You're driving down the highway and you see this black triangle, and you stop, but it's very unusual because it seems to have man-made light bulbs on it. You observe it for quite a while, and then it moves off at a kind of slow pace. And then how did you finally lose sight of it? Did it just keep moving away?
It climbed over the mountain range to the north of me. I say climb, it doesn't fly. The way it flies is it hugs the ground in a manner that it kind of shapes the ground in the air. So like, if the aircraft is flying on level ground and there's a ravine up ahead, it's going to drop down into the ravine and come back up the other side. Just because
almost like a reverse terrain guidance in a way.
Exactly. So when it hit the mountain, it didn't actually fly in a level plane straight over the mountain. It hugged the ground and eventually climbed the mountain until it reached the peak and went down the other side.
So this sounds like a man-made object. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And it had to be some kind of a military vehicle.
Definitely.
Right. So I've heard that what they have is, and I think you and I might have talked about this on Facebook, is that they have supposedly the military has these blimps that have a lot of photo sensors on the top and ways to project what they see from the top onto the bottom. And the way that they go is that let's say on a very, very calm night or a cloudless night, it can take pictures of the sky above projected on the bottom of the blimp. So if this blimp goes over you, it's almost like you don't see it. Have you ever heard of something like that flying around out there?
Well, you're kind of talking about two things, because with the blimps, it does seem that blimps did exist and are real and are still being used, but certainly not all of them are blimps. And from my research and from witness testimony, it seems some of them are certainly using some type of anti-gravity propulsion. At the very least, something to that effect. And as far as what you were talking about, the invisibility, there's certainly enough reports about these black triangles using some type of cloaking device that essentially makes the craft almost invisible, but it's kind of like a predator invisibility where you can kind of see the outline. It's a little wrinkled or ripply on the center parts, but you can still more or less make it out, but it's definitely a lot harder. And of course, I'm fairly certain they're doing that, and they already have invisible aircraft.
Right. You're listening to Mack Maloney's Military X-Files show here on the Global Radio Alliance. We're talking with Shawn Kevin Jason here tonight, an expert on black triangles. He's been telling us about his first encounter with them. He's working on a book about black triangles. And I believe we're coming up on a break, and we're going to take a little break, and we'll come back and get more into this topic. So you're listening to Mack Maloney's Military X-Files show here on the Global Radio Alliance. And guest tonight is Shawn Kevin Jason, who's telling us all we want to know about black triangles. He had an encounter with a black triangle back in 1996, and it really spurred his interest in them. We're talking about what they might be, what they could be, and what they're probably not. So, Shawn, now you saw this black triangle over the highway we talked about. It looked like it had really man-made light bulbs on it. You observed it hovering over you for some time, and then it gradually moved away. Now, my question is this, is that if this was a man-made object, and if it was some kind of military vehicle, probably some kind of a spy vehicle or something like that, why would it be hanging over a highway? Isn't this something that they would want to keep tip-top secret, or is there some reason they want us to see these things?
Well, that's probably the big question right there, and I think NIDS also tried to address that question, and that's kind of what threw them for a loop as well, is why are these things hovering 20 feet over public highways trying to frighten, innocent civilians? And in the end, they concluded that these things must be extraterrestrial, which I don't believe for 1 minute, just because of my own encounter and the light bulbs I saw. To me, that just says man-made all the way. The big question is, why are they, sitting above these highways? And I believe it's probably a multi-part thing. One, they know their black triangles are probably easy to identify as far as being a stealth aircraft, so they want to throw off the scent and try to put these aircraft in situations most people would interpret as being alien. And some UFO sitting 20 feet over a highway speaks alien to most people. Not to say that there are no aliens, there most certainly are, but in these situations, it's definitely not alien. And the other reason, the other reason may be they're actually conducting experiments on innocent civilians just to see how they react and possibly how it changes their life afterwards.
Just tell us what NIDS is. There might be people out in the audience that don't know what NIDS is.
Oh, sorry, yeah. NIDS was the National Institute for Discovery Science based out of Las Vegas, which was basically a group of scientists who investigated the UFO phenomenon and was headed up by Robert Bigelow, who was, I believe, a multimillionaire, and just funded this out of his own pocket to get some of the answers about this. And a big... Sorry,
are they around? Are they around? They're still around?
No, they went defunct about 10 years ago, just before they concluded that these things are probably alien and not man-made, and not long after that, they started doing defense contract work.
Well, that's very interesting. Okay, so what we're looking at is that they're probably man-made, and the question is why would they want us being the civilians to see them? And there's a couple of answers to that. There might be that they want to scare us, or they might be doing some kind of experiments on us, but is it also that they might want to see if it's reported in the media the next day, that type of thing, just to kind of take the pulse on what people are seeing, what people might report to the media?
I'm sure they probably follow the reports to see if these aircraft are, being reported and what people are saying. So I'm sure that may be some of it, and just kind of seeing how people react to it and what they do about it.
But when you talked about that they might be doing experiments on humans, this is an area that I'm always kind of interested in. What kind of experiments do you think that, let's say these things are government vehicles. What kind of experiments would they want to be doing on us?
Well, if you want to, basically imitate an alien craft and expose someone to it and see how they're going to react, does this person commit suicide a year later because of what they saw? Or does it totally change their life in a positive way, negative way? What happens to them? And if you're going to just hover over anyone in some random secluded place walking along, you're not going to really know who this person is. But if you hover over a car with a license plate, you can easily tell, for the most part, who's driving the car. So you can easily hover these craft over most highways, subject someone to a close encounter. Most of the time it's going to just be one car by itself. You can get the license plate from that and then figure out, from there how these people react or what they do about it.
Do you think it's just a coincidence that you have this precognitive ability and you saw it? Or do you think that they're so tied in they knew it was going to be you and so on and so forth?
No, I'm sure they were quite surprised that I was there just as much as I was surprised they were there, especially my vehicle at the time. On my front of the car I had an Area 51 license plate. That particular night, since I was expecting to encounter an alien vehicle, I wore one of my alien T-shirts that I had, so I was expecting something along those lines. So when they saw me, they were like, here we got the UFO guy right here.
You
we
were
couldn't
dressed
ask for a better witness,
Yeah, you came dressed. Okay, well, that's good. It's always smart to dress for the occasion. So now that was in 1996, and now that's over 15 years ago. How do you think that these things, you're the expert in it, and now you're writing a book on them. Have they advanced? Do people see black triangles these days that are like more advanced than the one you saw with the GE light bulbs on it?
Well, there's some reports about people talking about these tiles. Basically, the skin of the craft is covered in tiles, which I suspect may have something to do with the invisibility that they use on these craft. But also, they're reporting a lot of static electricity in the air. So when one hovers directly over you, you basically feel all your hair stand up. And, it's kind of like some compare it to rubbing a balloon on your head, or, just the whole scary feeling where every hair on your body stands up. But they're basically reporting some type of electricity in the air as these things pass over. So that doesn't sound like your typical, say, jet propulsion or your typical prop or anything along, the normal lines we're used to out here in the public world of aviation.
And where are they seen mostly? Out in this area, Arizona, Nevada, or other parts of the country?
All over the world, basically America, Europe, but for the most part, America and mostly in the western half of the United States.
Listening to Mack Maloney's Military X-Files here on the Global Radio Alliance. It's almost 8:30 here on the East Coast. We're going to be here till 9 o'clock. Our guest tonight is Shawn Kevin Jason. He's talking about black triangles, the different kinds of black triangles people see. He had his own encounter in 1996, and he's working on a book about black triangles. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but during the famous Phoenix Lights incident, lots of people saw, the lights over Phoenix, and a lot of people thought they were UFOs. But at the same time, that night, lots of people saw an enormous black triangle flying overhead. Correct?
Correct.
And what's the relation between that and what you saw? Or do you think it's just what you saw might have been a smaller version of what this thing was? Or are we talking about two different animals completely?
Well, it was basically two different animals, but from the same family of animals. So you think about it, if these are man-made, who would build them? Well, there's only a few people who are even capable of building such aircraft, of which would be Lockheed, Northrop, and Boeing. Now, in the case of my encounter with the small triangle, I would say it was probably more like a Lockheed craft. But in the case of the Phoenix Lights, I believe that was probably a Boeing Boomerang or a Boeing Chevron.
Lockheed may Lockheed builds the smaller crafts and Boeing goes for the larger sizes?
That's what I believe right now, based on my research, that Boeing is responsible for the larger of these stealth aircraft.
And where do you think the funding comes from this? Are these black operations coming from the CIA, that type of thing? Because the military, I know the military budget you can get away with a lot of stuff, but it's in a way that it's fairly tightly controlled. So where's the funding for this type of technology come from, do you think?
This would be all black budget. Anything along those lines with these aircraft would be under the black budget classified area.
And where do you think their purpose is? Are they surveillance craft or recon craft?
I imagine they're probably all of the above. You know, they're probably part transport, reconnaissance, bombers, fighters, your typical lineup of military aircraft.
So, do you think they're manned? Do you think that the thing that you saw in 1996, do you think there was a pilot? Do you think there was a crew in it?
I never got to see the cockpit because when it left me, the front of the craft was away from me, so I couldn't really tell. Although it was large enough, it could have certainly at least supported one pilot. But whether or not it was actually piloted or it was a drone is a little hard to say. I do know that they were probably watching me through some camera system on the craft, just because of the coincidence in their timing when they left. As I reached for my binoculars, they may have suspected I was reaching for a camera and wanted to leave before I got any, nice close-up pictures of this thing. That's what I suspect, but it's hard to say.
And the fact that that this one that you saw had, really quote-unquote light bulbs on it, I mean, obviously they're not using those lights to see where they're going. If they have such a fantastic technology, as you described, you don't need headlights and something like this. So doesn't it almost, in a way, lead you to believe that they wanted to be seen?
Well, yeah, they want it to be seen, but they don't want it to be seen as a man-made object. They want it to be seen as an alien object.
Right. So, so you say around the world, other than, on the western part of the United States, where have these things been seen, and how do you know that they're being seen around the world?
Well, of course, we had the Belgian UFO wave in the early 90s, late 80s, which was primarily a lot of black triangles, as well as England. They have been seen over England routinely, and of course America and Canada as well. I believe also in Asia, but pretty much around the world. But the focus, of course, has been here in the U.S.
So, and especially in that part of the world, out in Nevada, Arizona, this is where we know that the U.S. military tests, experimental aircraft, so naturally people would see them around there. Now, there was a case years ago of people seeing almost what you're describing over Missouri, parts of Missouri, close to Whiteman Air Force Base, which is in Missouri. Are you familiar with that? I think it was back in maybe the 90s or so. A lot of police saw it, and they actually kind of tracked it in a circle, and the circle ended at Whiteman Air Force Base. I mean, this thing was more like a boomerang, but people would see it floating at one point, and then it would take off at tremendous speeds. And another point are we talking about typical behavior of these flying triangles, black triangles?
Well, yeah, it depends on the model because, kind of like cars, not every car is the same, not every black triangle is the same as well. Some of them seem to be pretty limited as far as their maneuverability or their speed, while others seem to be quite fast. And if indeed these are all made by different airplane manufacturers, then it might make sense as far as, one black triangle has one type of propulsion system and another one has a completely different type of propulsion system.
Mm-hmm. So, all right, let's say that's, I think that we're pretty well satisfied that these are probably man-made objects. They're being controlled by the U.S. military. What do you think, and we're talking about, that there could be recon craft, so on and so forth, but let's say that they were offensive military weapons. Do you think these things are being used, let's say, in Afghanistan today?
Oh, yeah. I think we're absolutely using these already wherever we can.
What do you think they're doing? I mean, we know that we have drones, and these drones seem to do a pretty good job of spotting someone on the ground and then some kind of Al Qaeda type, and spawning him on the ground, shooting a missile at him, blowing him up. So, what would you need these black triangles for?
I want to say these are the type of aircraft that you're going to use for every single mission. I mean, we have a large arsenal of aircraft that do the job already. These would probably be for those select few special missions where they would be really helpful. Maybe it's an assassination or something to that effect.
Whacking someone in a country that we're not supposed to be flying over, in other words.
Exactly, and if we want to get in the back door without being seen and being totally stealth, that's the aircraft to do it.
Right. Well, you're listening to Mack Maloney's Military X-Files here on the Global Radio Alliance. It's now 8:35 on the East Coast. We're going to be here until 9 o'clock. We're talking to Shawn Kevin Jason about black triangles. Very fascinating subject. It's kind of like, as we were saying earlier, kind of like a subculture of UFO sightings, but I think we're pretty much determined that these things are man-made. Tell us a little bit about your book. How long have you been researching it, and so on and so forth?
Well, the book I've been working on for quite some time is just action around the writing it. I've been putting that off for some time as well. But it's just been a lot of things that I've been exposed to, heard, read, researched. So I'm just taking all these theories and everything I understand about the phenomenon and putting it all together into this basic book about black triangles and where it's all going from here.
When it's going to be done, it's a pain in the ass writing a book. You found that out, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I kind of figured it would be, but you just work through it.
Mm-hmm. And have you had any? And someone asked me this in an interview the other day, and I found it to be an interesting question. Have you found any interference during your research? Outside interference?
There's been situations where you second guess or you question, you wonder what if or maybe, but certainly there's been a few times where I've wondered that. But
Tell us.
Just been random times where suddenly we lose power to computers that it just really just bizarre electronic failures, things of that nature. And of course, being a computer engineer, for me, it just really didn't make sense because I've seen a lot of issues, power issues, computer issues, things like that. So some of these things, when they happen, you just make you wonder, but certainly you can't prove anything like that.
Right. Now, have you seen, other than black triangles, have you ever seen any other kinds of UFOs?
Oh yeah, I've actually seen quite a few different UFOs. But that was the only one I've seen, so close, kind of in your face. The other ones were kind of iffy, I saw one just a year ago, which really just blew me away. And, I kind of stuck it on the back shelf and figured I'll get to it when I get done with this whole black triangle thing. It was really just a bizarre UFO altogether.
Tell us about it, please. Tell us.
It was probably around May. And I was just in the backyard relaxing. It was a little bit after work. The sunset was going down, but it was still bright enough you could see outside. And I see this black object coming over the mountains north of Tucson, heading south, going straight towards the Air Force Base. And at first I didn't think anything of it, but as it got closer I realized, there's only so many aircraft that are painted black and would even fly around in broad daylight. So, that caught my attention. I ran aside, grabbed my binoculars to take a look at it. And as it got closer, I was able to really zoom in on this. Well, I wouldn't even call it a craft. It was more like 5 discs, but the discs were black, but they had basically triangular surfaces or faceted face on both sides. It was like a disc, a black disc, but also it was kind of like a stealth black disc. And there was roughly about 5 of them that were basically revolving or moving around an invisible central point. And there was this kind of glow that also surrounded the whole, just all these discs, like a round glow that surrounded it. And that was basically all there was to it. And it just traveled south towards the base, lost sight of it, and nothing more to it. It was just quite bizarre. Typically you're used to seeing one single object, a disc, a triangle, a cigar, but this was like 5 black faceted discs just revolving around one another. So it really didn't make any sense.
So what do you think that might have been? Are we talking UFO? I mean, extraterrestrials? Do you think this would be a government thing, or can you tell?
Well, the fact that it was black and the fact that it basically had a triangular surface suggested to me that it was probably ours, but what exactly it could be or how exactly it works is beyond me. The only thing I can think is maybe it was an invisible craft and that was something on the inside, but that still just doesn't make any sense to me. Still just back shelf it until I have more time for it.
Right. Well, you're listening to Mack Maloney's Military X-Files here on the Global Radio Alliance. Give us a call at 855-472-5483 if you want to answer us a question or if you've seen any black triangles. We're going to take a break now. We're talking to our guest tonight, Shawn Kevin Jason, who's been telling us about black triangles. He's writing a book he hopes to have out sometime next summer on black triangles, this very kind of odd offshoot of UFOs. I think that we've determined tonight that they're probably man-made. They probably have something to do with the military, and that there's some kind of recon craft, and possibly some kind of invisibility factor having to do with them. Maybe anti-grav devices. We don't know. But I want to thank him for joining us tonight. And you can follow Shawn on Examiner.com because he's the Tucson UFO reporter for Examiner.com. Plus, he's on Facebook, too. But anyway, the show is Mack Maloney's Military X-Files, and our guest tonight has been Shawn Kevin Jason. Very informative, really great guest in a really good subject, talking about black triangles. These things are seen all over the world. A lot of times they're seen in Nevada, in the Arizona area. I think we pretty much determined that they're probably man-made, probably U.S. military, and exactly what their capabilities are, who knows. But he's working on a book. Hopefully it'll be out sometime next summer on black triangles, and you can also follow him on Facebook and